It was a cold, gray morning in late autumn, the kind of day when the sky seemed permanently overcast and the world felt muted. I just made a pot of coffee and was settling in for a quiet Saturday when I decided to grab the mail. As I opened the front door, a chill wind swept past me, carrying with it the faint smell of damp leaves. That's when I saw it. Sitting on the welcome mat was a doll. It wasn't large, maybe a foot tall, with a porcelain face and a dress that looked old, like something out of the 19th century. The dress was frayed at the edges, the once white lace now yellowed with age. Its hair was dark and curly, its glassy blue eyes staring straight ahead. I froze, the warm mug of coffee in my hand suddenly feeling too hot against my skin. I lived alone in a small neighborhood where everyone kept to themselves. Who would leave something like this? Maybe it's a prank, I muttered, trying to shake off the unease creeping up my spine. I looked around, scanning the empty street, but there was no sign of anyone, just the wind, rattling the branches of the bare trees. I knelt down and picked up the doll. Its porcelain skin was cold, almost icy, and the weight of it felt heavier than it should have. Something about it felt wrong, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. There was no note, no explanation, just the doll. I brought it inside, setting it on the kitchen counter as I flipped through the rest of the mail. Bills, junk flyers, nothing unusual. But my gaze kept drifting back to the doll. It sat perfectly upright, its head tilted slightly to the side, as if it were watching me. "You're just a doll," I said out loud, as if saying it would dispel the unease. But even as I tried to convince myself, I couldn't help but notice the way its eyes seemed to follow me no matter where I stood. I decided to put it in the trash. It wasn't mine, and I had no interest in keeping it. I carried it to the garbage can in the backyard and dropped it in, slamming the lid shut. The sound echoed in the still air, and for a moment I felt relieved. That night I couldn't sleep. The wind howled outside, the old house creaking with every gust. I tossed and turned, but something kept nagging at me, a feeling I couldn't shake. Finally, around 2 a.m., I got up to grab a glass of water. As I walked into the kitchen, I froze. The doll was sitting on the counter. I stared at it, my pulse hammering in my ears. I knew I'd thrown it away. There was no way it could be here. My hands shook as I approached it, my breath visible in the cold air that seemed to fill the room. "How?" I whispered, but I couldn't finish the thought. I grabbed the doll again, taking it out to the curb this time. I opened the trash can, tossed it inside, and slammed the lid shut. Just to be sure, I placed a brick on top of the lid, securing it. My breath fogged in the air as I stood there for a moment, staring at the trash can. Satisfied, I went back inside and locked the door. The next morning, I woke to a faint tapping sound. At first, I thought it was the wind rattling the windows, but it was too rhythmic, too deliberate. I got up, groggy and annoyed, and made my way to the front door. The tapping stopped as I approached. Slowly, I unlocked the door and pulled it open. The doll was sitting on the welcome mat again. This time its head was tilted at an odd angle, and its hand was raised as if it had been knocking. I stumbled back, my heart racing. I didn't know what to do. It was impossible. There was no way it could have gotten out of the trash, no way it could have made it back to the house. I looked around the empty street again, my paranoia growing. The air felt heavier, colder, as if the world itself was pressing in on me. I grabbed the doll and threw it into the garage, slamming the door shut behind me. This time I locked it, double-checking the bolt. Whatever was happening, I didn't want to see that thing again. That night, I heard footsteps. They were soft, barely audible, but unmistakable. They echoed through the hallway, growing louder as they approached my bedroom. I held my breath, gripping the blanket tightly. The footsteps stopped just outside my door. The silence that followed was suffocating. I could hear my own heartbeat, feel the sweat trickling down my back. And then the doorknob turned. I bolted upright, staring at the door as it creaked open slowly. In the dim light from the hallway, I saw it, the doll. It stood in the doorway, its glassy eyes reflecting the faint light, its head tilted unnaturally. It moved. Not like a person, its movements were jerky, like a puppet on strings. It took a step into the room, its porcelain face cracking slightly as its smile widened. "You shouldn't have thrown me away," it said, its voice high-pitched and distorted, like a child's voice warped through static. I scrambled out of bed, backing away as it took another step. Its glassy eyes locked onto mine, unblinking. "Stay with me," it whispered. I grabbed the nearest object, a lamp, and hurled it at the doll. The impact shattered its face, but instead of breaking apart, it laughed. The sound was hollow, echoing as if it were coming from everywhere at once. "You can't get rid of me," it hissed, its voice now layered with something deeper, darker. "I'm yours now." The lights in the room flickered and the temperature plummeted. Shadows crawled across the walls, twisting and writhing as the doll stepped closer. I could feel the weight of its presence, the air growing thicker, suffocating. I ran. I didn't grab anything, just ran out of the house and into the freezing night. I didn't stop until I reached the end of the street, my breath fogging in the air as I turned to look back. The house was dark, the front door wide open, and standing on the porch, bathed in the pale glow of the streetlights, was the doll. It raised one hand, waving slowly. I never went back to that house. I moved to a new city, leaving everything behind. But sometimes, late at night, I hear the faint sound of tapping at my door. And when I look outside, there's nothing there, just the faint imprint of a small doll-like hand in the frost on the glass.